I watched Eternals late last night, and I just don't get all the critical hate for it. An unexpected tragedy forces the Eternals, ancient aliens who have been living on Earth in secret for thousands of years, out of the shadows to reunite against mankind's most ancient enemy, the Deviants. I've been looking forward to a new Marvel movie and obviously had no idea what to expect with Eternals. And this will be spoiler free because I want you to be able to enjoy it just as I did. The cast for this is amazing, and one that's a very large ensemble. We have Gemma Chan, Richard Madden, Brian Tyree Henry, Liam McHugh, Lauren Ridloff, Barry Cohen, Kumail Nanjiani, Ma Dong-seok, Salma Hayek, and Angelina Jolie. And while they're all the stars of this, it can be argued that Gemma Chan and Richard Madden are really the headliners. They have the most screen time, and the narrative follows their progression more than anyone else. The beginning of the movie gives us a tiny introduction into who these characters are, but I've got to say that the start of this film is a bit rough. It felt a little jumbled and almost like it was faltering. There's a very awkward dialogue exchange between Gemma Chan's Cersei and Richard Madden's Icarus. It's short, but it just didn't feel right. And if it was going for comedy, I don't think it worked. The story very quickly transitions into a big action sequence that showcases what each of the Eternals is able to do. And I really enjoyed this, even though it felt off. We're shown very quickly why these characters will be cool, and it gives us a taste for what's hopefully to come throughout the movie. What I really appreciate is that after this, the story steps back and dives into the characters. We've been given a dose of action to start, which is intriguing. Now we can settle into the slower build-out of our heroes. And the reason I say that the action sequence felt off is that while it's a chaotic action sequence with a bunch happening, and it's just like we've seen in many Marvel movies, the transitions and cuts between characters felt a little choppy. I mean, in no way was it bad, it just wasn't as smooth as I'd hoped, making it somewhat jarring. But after that, the movie really finds its stride, and subsequent action sequences felt wonderful and they looked great. One of the questions that many have had, including me, is that if the Eternals have been around for so long, why didn't they stop Thanos? I like that this is answered and it's done simply. The explanation felt right and it makes sense for the whole of the story. Because the Eternals have been on Earth for something like 7,000 years, they've obviously seen a lot and been present for a ton of events. I enjoyed how as we learn about each character, the film will take us from the present to the distant past to show us moments surrounding a certain character. And this allows us to not only learn about the Eternals, but also get transported to some amazing crafted cities that are now only ruins. We see places like Babylon, Tenochtitlan, and Mesopotamia. And some of the visual reconstructions of these are just beautifully crafted, and they're impressive to view. Now those renderings are obviously digital effects, but they looked wonderful. And I loved the effects that were used with the Eternals to show off their powers. Now if you've seen the trailer, you know that Icarus can shoot lasers from his eyes. Thena, who's played by Angelina Jolie, can materialize these intricate weapons just out of thin air. And Kingo, who's played by Kumail Nanjiani, he shoots things from his fingertips. Each of the Eternals has a special power, and each of those, when displayed, it's gold and swirly. And I love that aesthetic. It gives it an ethereal look and feel, and then the consistency between all of them shows their connectedness. I think some of the effects, or maybe even the way that they're utilized, have been seen before in other Marvel films, but not so much that it was distracting or a blatant ripoff. And I haven't even discussed the things that the Eternals came to fight. The Deviants are these animal-like creatures that are very sinuous. It's almost looking like they're made out of pure muscle, but all of the fibers or tendons are exposed. And they're a shimmering type of rainbow pearlescent color, but more of the darker colors than anything bright and shiny. They're menacing in their design, and they're very creative in their execution. And some resemble animals on Earth, just more massive and incredibly more fearsome and deadly. And they're powerful adversaries for the Eternals to fight against, and I loved the variety that we see within them. This movie is one of the longer Marvel films at 2 hours and 37 minutes, but I didn't mind because this is an introductory story with a bunch of characters that we need to get to know if we're ever going to be invested in their journey. I don't think we get a monster level of detail on each of the characters, but with each of them we get key moments to see their hearts, their motivations, vulnerabilities, and even flaws. Each time these work to build increasingly engaging characters and create a story that I became very invested in. And with that story progression, there are some wonderful arcs that I didn't see coming. Now maybe you will see them, but because I haven't read any of the comics, I went into this completely blind. So everything that happened on screen, I mean every character, good or bad, was a new experience for me. There are a few times where the characters stare longingly off into the distance, and some scenes that are a bit drawn out, so they could have been trimmed, but it's not saving too much time, and it possibly runs the risk of hurting the narrative. And the overall storyline is much darker than I imagined it would be, which I enjoyed. Again, not knowing anything about the story or the characters, I was learning about all of this as it went along. So when we see things out in space and what they mean for the larger narrative of the MCU, I love where this could potentially lead. And not knowing anything about these characters, I enjoyed the development of a few of them. Brian Tyree Henry as Phastos is wildly intelligent, but it's his dry sarcasm that endeared me to him. We get to see his heart and how his time on Earth has affected his entire outlook on existence. And I love how it shapes his priorities, but it doesn't stop him from being hilarious. Ma Dong-seok as Gilgamesh was also wonderful. I mean, he's quiet and strong, but that strength isn't just in the physical form. His care for the characters shines through more than his fighting strength. And that's not a small feat because he's epically strong. I love the compassion and the warmth that he brings to the character and how he uses that to comfort his fellow Eternals. Kumail Nanjiani is not only some of the comedic relief to the tension of the story, but he also brings some good character depth as one that is conflicted about certain circumstances, and then he doesn't hide it. And that creates awesome friction, allowing his character to become very relatable. Angelina Jolie and Salma Hayek are featured less than I imagined that they would be. I like the story complication that's involved with Jolie's Thena. I mean, it adds a level of complexity and intrigue that spans the story. Hayek, as the Eternals leader Ajak, is somewhat stoic and bland. I wanted her to be more emotional and even explosive at certain points, but she remained fairly detached. Then there's Makkari, played by Lauren Ridloff, and she's incredibly fast, but I love that she's the first Marvel MCU hero that's deaf. Her character is witty and funny, and I loved her banter back and forth with a couple of the Eternals, showing how they've maintained this close friendship over the millennia. One thing that I thought was cool was I read in an interview that there are a few times where Ridloff would need to react to something that was happening behind her, and she had to react at a certain moment, but she obviously couldn't hear the action as her cue. So Angelina Jolie suggested that they use a small laser pointer to cue her when to react, and then that was then digitally erased for the final product. And this enabled Ridloff to participate in some of the complex fight scenes and not just be relegated to the periphery. And speaking of fight scenes, there is an exciting end battle that is not only impressive, but it's terribly entertaining and engaging. Now, as much as I did enjoy this, I do have a nitpick. There are a lot of superhero stances where the Eternals are all posed like they're just waiting for a photo op. They'll just land or be standing around in a line or a semicircle, and in those moments, it was distractingly odd. Now, I know that in other Marvel movies, we've had the heroes all in a pose, but in those, the camera is panning around them to create some exciting movement. Here, we're just getting a wide shot of them as they stand. It's almost asking us as the audience to bask in their impressiveness. So overall, Eternals is an immersive story that transports us around the world and throughout time. Our heroes are varied with some intriguing characteristics whose storylines create a compelling tale and a story arc that is both dark and surprising. The movie is long, but I think it's necessary to build out this large cast, giving us heroes that we can be invested in and concerned for. And while the beginning of the film is a bit messy and a few scenes may be dragged out a little too much, the pace of the movie, while patient, is still progressive, moving us efficiently towards an exciting climax. There's a mid-credit scene as well as a post-credit scene, and you'll definitely want to stick around for both as they do help tease what's to come in the MCU. There's sex, no nudity, some profanity, and a bunch of violence. I give Eternals 4 out of 5 couches. What are you looking forward to most in this next phase of the MCU? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.